Mountains. Crater site. The last time Goku had seen Gohan cry was at his funeral. His own funeral, the one they held after Cell, after the Cell Games, after the Kamehameha that took everything Gohan had and left an 11-year-old standing in a crater with one arm hanging useless and a silence around him that was somehow louder than the explosion had been. Goku had watched from the other world, that strange flat watching that death allowed, and he had seen his son's face when they told him. He had seen the way Gohan's expression did something that had no name, not breaking exactly, more like a bridge that had been engineered past its tolerance, still standing, still technically intact, but changed in its fundamental structure in a way that would never fully reverse. Gohan had not cried at the funeral itself. He had stood very straight in his torn gi and looked at the ground and not cried, and that had been worse somehow than crying would have been. He was crying now. Goku could see him from half a mile away, standing at the center of what had been a mountain valley and now a crater, a perfect circle of scorched earth 300 meters across, still smoking at the edges, the rock beneath fused to glass by heat that had no business existing at ground level. Gohan was on his knees in the middle of it. His clothes were destroyed, his hair white, blazing white, the white of his ultimate form that he had spent years mastering and refining and pushing beyond what anyone had thought its ceiling was slowly dimming back to black as the power drained out of him. His shoulders were shaking. Around him, in a ring at the crater's edge, stood the others. Piccolo, Vegeta, arms folded, his expression unreadable in the way Vegeta's expression was always unreadable when he was genuinely disturbed rather than performatively irritated. Beerus beside him, holding his staff loosely, the angel's perpetual mild smile entirely absent. Pan being physically restrained by Trunks, fighting him with every ounce of her considerable strength. Krillin with his hand over his mouth, 18 with her hand on Krillin's shoulder, which was the most emotion 18 ever showed. All of them looking at Gohan, all of them looking at what was standing 20 meters in front of Gohan on the other side of the crater. Goku arrived between one instant and the next. Instant transmission, 2 fingers off his forehead, and then just there, materializing at the crater's edge between Vegeta and Piccolo, without announcement or preamble. The wind from the crater pushed at his gi. He smelled ozone and something darker beneath it. Something that reminded him of the time chamber on a bad day, the smell of reality being stretched past its natural tolerances. He looked at what was standing in the crater. He stood very still for a long moment.
Vegeta said nothing. That was how Goku knew it was bad. Vegeta always had something to say. The fact that he was standing there in complete silence, arms at his sides, jaw set, eyes doing something complicated and uncharacteristic, told Goku more than any words could have. Piccolo stepped close. His voice, when he spoke, was barely above a murmur. The voice he used when he was being careful about who heard him. It came through the rift 4 hours ago. We contained it here, or we tried to. Goku nodded slowly. His eyes hadn't moved. Gohan fought it first, Piccolo continued. There was something in the Namekian's voice that Goku had only heard a handful of times in 30 years of knowing him, something that sat beneath the usual granite composure like a fault line beneath bedrock. It didn't help, Goku said. No, it didn't help. Goku finally moved his eyes to Gohan, to his son kneeling in the melted glass, diminishing and shaking, and then back to the thing across the crater. It looked like Gohan. That was the precise and terrible fact of it. It looked like his son. Same height, same build, same face, that strange composite of both his parents. Chi-Chi's sharp features softened by something inherited from Goku's side. The face that had looked up at him from a cradle and from a battlefield and from across 1,000 dinner tables and from the moment of its own devastating strength at age 11, when it had saved the world at a cost that Goku Goku, in the parts of himself he didn't examine too often, still quietly felt responsible for. The same face, but the hair was black and stood straight up like a dark flame rather than hanging loose in Gohan style, and the eyes were the color of a bruised sky, not the red of a Saiyan consumed by darkness, not the teal of ultra instinct, something else, something that sat between those colors in a spectrum natural evolution had never produced. And the ki coming off it was wrong in the way the sky was wrong, recognizable in its component parts, built from something that was genuinely Gohan's power signature, but assembled incorrectly, mirror-flipped, the way a familiar song sounds when you play it backward and can still hear what it almost is. The thing that looked like Gohan stood with its hands loose at its sides and looked back at Goku with those bruised sky eyes and said nothing. Goku looked at it for a long time. Then he took off his outer gear layer, folded it once, and set it on the rock beside him. Behind him, Pan stopped fighting Trunks. The crater went very quiet. Even the smoke from the edges seemed to slow, as if the air itself was paying attention.
Goku stepped over the crater's edge and walked down into it. The descent took 30 seconds on foot, across fused glass that crunched faintly under his boots. He didn't power up, didn't let his ki rise, just walked. The same unhurried walk he'd had since he was a child, slightly forward-leaning, easy in the shoulders. The walk of someone who had never quite learned to be intimidated by distance or by the things that waited at the end of it. The thing wearing Gohan's face watched him cross the crater. Gohan, still on his knees 20 meters to Goku's right, lifted his head as his father passed. His face was a ruin. Not just physical damage, though there was plenty of that. A deep cut across his forehead still bleeding freely, his left eye swollen nearly shut, his lip split. The ruin was something underneath the physical, something in the eyes, a particular kind of devastation that came not from being beaten, but by being beaten by something that used your own face to do it. Goku did not stop walking when he passed the thing, but his hand dropped briefly to his son's shoulder, not gripping, just resting there for the 3 seconds it took to pass. And Gohan's shaking slowed incrementally, the way a vibrating string slows when you lay a finger gently against it. Then Goku's hand fell away, and he kept walking. He stopped 7 meters from the thing and stood with his hands at his sides and looked at it. It looked back. The eyes were the strangest part up close. From a distance, they just read as wrong-colored. Up close, you could see what was actually happening in them. There was intelligence there, yes, and power, yes, and something that might have been emotion, in the way deep water has currents you can't see from the surface. But the intelligence was organized around a different axis than a normal person's, like a mind that had been taken apart and put back together by someone who understood the components, but not the original arrangement. It was wearing Gohan's face, but it was not Gohan. It was not really a Gohan at all. Goku needed to be absolutely clear about that inside himself before anything else happened, because what came next was going to require him to fight without hesitation, and he had made the mistake once before against Goku Black in that other timeline, of letting recognition slow him, of seeing a face he knew and feeling the half-second of wrong-footed confusion that a familiar face always produced, and paying for that half-second in ways that mattered. He would not make that mistake again. He looked at the thing wearing his son's face, and he found the place inside himself where it was simply an opponent. He was very good at finding that place. It had taken him a long time to build, years of learning with Whis, years of ultra-instinct training, years of understanding that emotion in a fight was not a weakness to be eliminated, but a current to be directed, and that the direction that served you was not detachment from feeling, but mastery of its timing. He felt everything he was feeling. He didn't file it away. He let it exist. He let it inform him. Then it spoke. Its voice was Gohan's voice. That was almost the worst part. Not quite as bad as the face, but close, because voices carried more than faces did. Voices carried memory in a way that was harder to defend against. Gohan's voice, slightly lower than it had been in his 20s, settled into the register he'd found in his late 30s, the voice that read bedtime stories to Pan and argued case law with his colleagues at the university and called out across their house on Sunday mornings. "You are slower than I expected," it said. Goku said nothing. "It has studied you extensively," the thing continued. Its tone was conversational, almost pleasant. "Every fight, every recorded power level, every tactical pattern, the Gohan of my timeline was quite thorough. He documented everything before," a pause, slightly meaningful, before the sentence completed itself, "before the process completed." Goku's eyes moved, just briefly, just a flicker, to Gohan on his knees and back to the enemy. "He fought well," the thing said, following his gaze. "Better than I anticipated. The gap between what I knew and what he actually was when cornered was significant." A pause. "You raised him to surprise people. I found that admirable in its way." Goku rolled his neck once, left and right, a small preparatory motion. "You are not going to ask questions," the thing observed. It sounded almost curious. "No," Goku said. A pause. "Most people ask questions. I know what you are. Asking questions won't change what I need to do." The bruised sky eyes regarded him for a moment. Then something happened in the thing's expression. Not a smile, not quite, but the muscular movement that preceded one before the warmth required to complete it arrived and found nothing to work with. "The Goku of my timeline asked questions. He asked quite a few. He was still asking them when it moved." Crater floor. The speed was the first shock, not because it was faster than Goku. It wasn't, or at least not by enough to matter at this stage, but because of the quality of the movement. Normal speed was normal speed. You measured it, accounted for it, matched or exceeded it, and went from there. This was different. It moved with the kind of economy Goku associated with very specific fighters. Whis had it. Hit had a version of it. His own ultra instinct had it. At its highest expression, the economy of motion that came not from training speed in isolation, but from eliminating every unnecessary component of movement until what remained was pure displacement. A body going from point A to point B without the intermediate decisions that slower, lesser fighters needed. It was on him in the same instant it moved, fist driving toward his solar plexus with Gohan's exact fighting geometry, the hip rotation, the shoulder drop, the knuckle alignment, all of it Gohan's, learned and replicated with a precision that was itself a kind of violence, because it meant whatever had built this thing had been inside Gohan's fighting style intimately enough to copy not just the techniques, but the intentions beneath them. Goku's body moved without instruction. His left forearm came up and across and deflected the fist, not blocking it, redirecting it, spending its energy on air. In the same motion, his right elbow drove toward the Ten's temple. It wasn't there. It had slipped the elbow, the way water slips a stone, flowing to his left, and its knee came up toward his ribs. He turned his body and took it on his hip instead, letting the impact spin him rather than absorb him, converting the rotation into a back fist that it ducked under to so smoothly it barely seemed to move its head. They separated by 3 meters.
craters, both still standing, neither breathing hard. Behind them, at the crater's edge, absolute silence. Goku shook out his right hand. The knuckle tingled faintly from the deflection. He looked at the thing and recalibrated, faster than he'd initially given it credit for, more fluid. The economy of movement wasn't just copied from Gohan, it had been refined, integrated with something else, some other fighting philosophy, layered beneath Gohan's natural style, the way a translation preserves the words of the original text, but arranges them according to a different grammar. He could see both things simultaneously, Gohan's fighting and the other thing beneath it. Reading both at once was its own challenge. The thing straightened from its crouch, rolled one shoulder, examined him with those bruised sky eyes. It came again, faster this time. The second exchange lasted 11 seconds and covered 200 meters of crater floor. The two of them blurred across the fused glass so quickly that from the crater's edge they appeared less like individuals fighting and more like weather, a localized disturbance of air and impact, the sharp reports of blocked strikes echoing off the mountain walls like close thunder. Goku fought on instinct in these seconds, not ultra instinct, not yet, not the full expression of it, but the instinct that 20 years of ultra instinct training had built into his body, below the level of conscious thought, the reflexive geometry that made his defenses automatic and his attacks opportunistic. He read the pattern of the thing as they fought, storing information the way he always did in combat, not analytically, not consciously, but somatically, the body learning the opponent's rhythm the way a river learns the shape of its bed. What he was learning was troubling.
The thing's defense was almost perfect, not Gohan's defense. Gohan had always been a better attacker than defender, had always relied slightly on overwhelming power to compensate for the gaps a purely technical fighter could exploit. This thing had no such gaps. Every line was closed, every angle covered. It fought as if it knew exactly what Goku was going to throw before he threw it, which was either extraordinary pattern recognition or the more concerning possibility that it actually did know, had studied enough footage, absorbed enough tactical information to predict Goku's sequencing before it arrived. He changed patterns mid-exchange, going from his standard combination into something he'd developed with Vegeta in training, something that existed only in their sparring vocabulary, never deployed in actual combat. The thing adjusted half a second slower than it would have against something it had prepared for, but it adjusted. Goku noted that half second and said nothing. They separated again, 40 meters apart this time, both breathing slightly harder. Gohan, on his knees in the glass, was watching with his one good eye. His hands were pressed flat against the ground. His ki was rising very slowly, the involuntary regeneration of a Saiyan body knitting itself back together, cell by cell, the process that had saved him more times than he would ever properly acknowledge, even to himself. Goku did not look at Gohan. Looking at Gohan right now would cost him something he needed. The thing across the crater was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite categorize. Not anticipation, not hunger, something quieter and more patient, like a scientist observing an experiment, proceeding along expected parameters. Then it powered up. The ki that came off it when it released its restraint was enormous, not Gohan-level enormous. Gohan's current peak, refined and elevated through years of work after rediscovering his purpose in the decade following the Tournament of Power, was itself a thing that bent the air and troubled the clouds. This was that, but wrong, assembled from a blueprint that had been subtly altered, optimized for something other than what Gohan had optimized his power for. Gohan had always pushed his power toward a sustained maximum, the philosophy of a fighter who'd learned that in the fights that mattered, you needed to hold your highest level across a duration, not spike and crash. This thing's power moved differently. It had that same sustained base, but layered on top of it something that pulsed, a rhythmic intensification that rose and fell like breathing, except each exhalation came out slightly stronger than the inhalation had been, escalating, building incrementally
incrementally, and if you extrapolated the curve, it did not plateau. Goku watched the key signature and extrapolated the curve. He let his own power rise, not to his peak, nowhere near it yet, but enough. The gold of Super Saiyan came up around him like a second skin, hair rising, the electric crackle along his arms. He hadn't used Super Saiyan as a fighting form rather than a power display in years. It was baseline now, the floor rather than the ceiling, but there was information in showing the thing a transformation it certainly had analyzed and prepared for, in watching how it responded to something known.
It watched him transform with those patient eyes and didn't move. He pushed to Super Saiyan 2. The power doubled, the electricity intensifying, the air around him compressing noticeably. He could feel the crater floor cracking in a ring beneath his feet. Still, the thing didn't move. Still patient, still watching. He held at Super Saiyan 2 and looked back at it across 40 meters of superheated air. "You're not going to match me," he said, the first words he'd spoken since before the fight began. He said it not as a taunt, but as an observation, because he was genuinely trying to understand the tactical logic. The thing tilted its head, that Gohan gesture again. "No, not yet," it said. "You're letting me show you my transformations." "Yes, so I can plan for you." A pause. "So I can confirm what I already know." It corrected itself, the distinction apparently important to it, the difference between data and direct observation. "Your power signature shifts microscopically at each transformation threshold. Those shifts are informative. They tell me where the seams are." Goku absorbed this. "You're looking for weakness in my transformations. I'm looking for the transitions between them," the thing said. "You're vulnerable between states. It's your one consistent technical flaw across every recorded fight, the moment of commitment before the new form fully stabilizes. You've been hit in that window before, multiple times. Against Beerus, against Jiren early in the Tournament of Power, against Moro. You disguise it well, but the window exists." The crater was very quiet. "You've been waiting for me to transform," Goku said slowly. "I've been inviting you to," the thing said. "There's a difference." In the next 3 seconds, Goku made a decision that went against most of what he'd normally do and precisely matched what his gut, informed by decades of fights against opponents smarter than him, was telling him. He dropped back to base form. The gold died. The electricity faded. His hair fell black, and his ki compressed back to its base level, which was still, by most scales that applied to beings in the universe, completely absurd. But relative to where he'd been a moment ago, it was a radical de-escalation. The thing across the crater went very still. For the first time since Goku had arrived, something moved in his eyes that was not patience, something that might have been recalculation. "Interesting," it said. "I fight better from the ground up." "It's always been true," Goku said. "Power is a tool, and like all tools, it works best when you build toward it rather than starting with it. And you don't want to give me the transitions. You'll get a worse one fighting from base. A beat, maybe. Let's find out," Goku said, and moved first. Base form Goku against something calibrated for Super Saiyan wasn't a guaranteed disadvantage, not for him. The physics were counterintuitive but real. He'd worked with Whis on this exact scenario, on the way an opponent's preparation becomes a liability when the variable it prepared for is removed. An opponent who had studied your Super Saiyan fighting geometry was studying a set of movement patterns generated by a body operating at a specific power-to-mass ratio. Remove the power, the ratio changed, and the predicted geometry didn't manifest. The opponent was chasing a ghost.
He hit it 4 times in 2 seconds. Clean shots, nothing elegant, just an index finger jabbed to pressure points common to every humanoid body, regardless of power level. The neck cluster, the floating rib, the hip flexor junction, the hollow of the knee. Not damaging strikes, not at base form output against something at this level. Information strikes. He was reading the body's responses the way a musician reads an instrument, finding out where it was rigid and where it moved and where it absorbed and where it transmitted. The thing absorbed the first 2, neck and rib, distributing the impact efficiently, lost nothing, moved away from the 3rd, the hip flexor, overcommitted slightly to the avoidance, lost a 1/10 of a second. The 4th it blocked, forearm across the knee strike, but the block was a fraction slow, and the impact landed partially before the block completed. And in the fraction of a second between the partial landing and the block completing, Goku felt the thing's weight shift in a way that was informative, left side slower than right. Not trained slowness, not a deliberate asymmetry used tactically, which he'd seen with Hit and a handful of others. Something structural in the way the thing had been constructed or had developed that produced a marginal left side lag. It would be compensated for at higher power levels, where raw speed overwhelmed minor margins, but at base level, at close range, in the territory of fractions, he filed it. It came around again. The next 12 seconds were the most technically intricate Goku had engaged in since his final sparring session with Whis 3 months ago. Pure craft, both of them reading and responding and adjusting in real time, the fight existing in the narrow space between action and reaction, where only the most refined instincts could operate. No flashy techniques, no transformations, no special attacks, just 2 bodies at extreme close range, each trying to impose its geometry on the other.
The thing was extraordinary, whatever it was. Whatever process had created it, it hadn't skimped on the fundamentals. Its base form capability was beyond what Goku had initially assessed. He'd made the common error of reading it as primarily a power-based fighter because of the ki output, and power-based fighters pressed to fight below their power ceiling typically degraded. This one didn't. Technical proficiency held at every level. It could really fight. He felt something happen in his chest that was not fear and not excitement exactly, but the specific emotional signature of those 2 things combined. The thing that only happened against opponents who were genuinely, legitimately difficult. The thing that had happened against Vegeta at 23, and against Cell at 30-something, and against Beerus, and against Jiren, and against a small number of others across the long life of fighting people who were supposed to be impossible. His body warmed to it, the old machinery of him, the pure Saiyan inheritance, waking up. He grinned, just lightly, just the corner of his mouth. The thing saw it. Something shifted in those bruised sky eyes. Then it stopped pulling its punches. The strike that came next was not a strike Goku used. It was not from any martial art tradition Goku had studied. It came from the left, the thing's nominally slower side, and the fact that it came from there was a deliberate statement. A horizontal hammer blow with ki packed into its leading edge, focused not like a blast, but like an edge. A ki blade without the blade. Pure compressed force shaped to a cutting geometry. It caught Goku across the chest before he'd fully read the trajectory. He went back, not just back and up through the crater wall behind him, 6 meters of fused rock, and then the mountain slope beyond it, plowing a furrow through frozen earth that went 40 meters before he planted his feet and arrested his momentum by digging his ki into the ground and pushing against his own inertia hard enough to crack the bedrock in a 6-meter radius. He stood in the furrow he'd made and breathed. The impact hurt, properly hurt, which was unusual enough to note. Not the flash pain that faded in seconds, but a deep structural ache, the kind of meant something had been stretched past its tolerance. He pressed 2 fingers against his sternum, felt his ribs flex slightly wrong, and concluded that 2 of them were cracked.
possibly 3. He breathed through it, let his ki survey the damage, and noted the quality of what had hit him. The ki blade that was not Goku's technique, that was the other thing underneath, the second fighting philosophy he'd been tracking since the beginning of the fight. He needed to understand where that came from, because it was good, genuinely, technically excellent, and at higher power levels, a technique like that scaled dangerously. The thing appeared at the edge of the crater wall, standing on the rim, looking down at him in the furrow, unhurried, patient as geology. "You didn't see that one coming," it said.
He didn't answer. He was breathing. "It developed it independently," it said, "or the other Gohan did in the years after." Another one of those precise pauses. "After I completed the process. In my timeline, he had years of motivation to innovate." "Who are you?" Goku said. It blinked, the first genuine surprise gesture he'd seen from it. "I thought you weren't asking questions. Changed my mind." A pause. Then something shifted in its expression. Not warmth, but the ghost of something that might have been warmth in a different context. "I am what Gohan became in a timeline where a version of you wasn't there to stop what I was when I arrived. In a timeline where Gohan fought me for 3 years before I absorbed enough of him to complete the transition." The silence stretched. "Absorbed?" Goku said. "The process requires a compatible host." Something that might have been regret moved through the bruised sky eyes. Distantly, the way a shape in deep water might be a hand or might be a current, impossible to tell from the surface. "He was the most compatible available. I didn't choose that." "He's still in there," Goku said. Not a question. He was watching the eyes. The thing said nothing. Something that absorbed Gohan over 3 years and then jumped timelines. It didn't come here just to fight. Still nothing. "You came here for this timeline's Gohan." The bruised sky eyes held his for a long moment. "The process is incomplete," it said, finally, quietly, with a flatness that was not quite emotionlessness, more like an emotion that had been walked over so many times it had compressed to stone. "In my timeline, Gohan's capacity was finite. He gave everything, but there was a limit. In this timeline, your Gohan has developed further, pushed further. The gap between what I absorbed in my timeline and what exists here represents a pause, completion." Goku's expression did not change. "If you take him," he said, "what happens to what's already in you?" The thing's jaw tightened. A millimeter, a fragment, but he saw it.
"He's still in there," Goku said again, softly. "Goku," it began. "Don't," he said, and something was in his voice that hadn't been there before. Something that was not combat readiness or tactical assessment or the careful emotional management of a man who had learned to fight without being consumed by feeling. Something older and raw and more fundamental than all of that. "Don't use his voice to talk to me about him. Not right now." The thing closed its mouth. Goku pressed his hand against his cracked ribs one more time, felt his ki knit them another fraction, rolled his neck, and looked up at the thing on the rim. "I'm going to get him out," he said. Something moved through the thing's face, complex, layered, entirely unreadable in its final configuration. "You can't." "Yeah." Goku settled his feet. "I'm probably not, but I'm going to try anyway." A beat. "That's kind of my thing." He shot upward off the ground like a fired round, midair, above the crater. Base form speed, still terrifying even without power amplification, and the fight resumed. What followed was the longest sustained exchange of the encounter. 40 seconds of continuous contact that took them off the ground entirely, the two of them trading strikes in the air above the crater, while the watchers at its edge scrambled back from the ki discharge, and Piccolo erected a barrier over the group with his remaining strength, and the mountain walls around them shed avalanches triggered by the atmospheric disturbance. Goku pushed his base form harder than he had in years. The Ultra Instinct training had done something interesting to it, given it a ceiling that wasn't really a ceiling, a capacity that expanded under pressure in ways standard power metrics didn't capture. He pushed against that ceiling now, let the fight's escalating intensity drive him toward it, felt the familiar dissolution of the boundary between intention and action, the precursor of ultra instinct manifesting. Not there yet. Close. The thing hit him in the jaw, and he tasted blood, spun away, came back with a knee to the midsection that actually made it grunt, the first sound of impact he had extracted from it, and followed the knee with an elbow and a palm strike and a grab at his wrist that it twisted out of with Gohan's exact wrist escape technique, the one Piccolo had drilled into Gohan at age 4 on a volcano, the one Goku had watched from the air while training above them, and thought even then that his son's sense was going to be extraordinary.
He used the failed grab as a fulcrum, spinning his own momentum into a heel drop the thing blocked, but which drove it 300 feet before it arrested its own descent. They faced each other in midair, the crater below them and the wrong-colored sky above them, and nothing else for miles. They were both breathing hard now, both damaged, him first visibly, the cracked ribs and the jaw, and a cut above his eye he hadn't quite caught in time. The thing had a bruise forming along its left cheekbone and was holding its right arm slightly differently, the elbow not fully extending, something bothering that joint. They looked at each other across 30 meters of cold mountain air. "You are extraordinary," the thing said, and it sounded almost genuine, almost like something that had traveled across timelines and fought its way through everything between its origin and here, and had not expected to be impressed at this point, and could still be impressed. "Yeah," Goku said, wiping blood from above his eye with the back of his hand, looking at it with mild interest before looking back up. "I know." It almost laughed. He saw the muscles reach for it. "Not arrogance," he added. "I just know what I can do." A pause. "What can you do, Goku?" The question wasn't rhetorical. There was something beneath it, something almost like hope, which made no sense, which he turned over and examined from multiple angles while they hovered and breathed and bled. "I can bring him back," Goku said. "Whatever you've done to him, I've seen worse. You haven't. You beat my son," Goku said. His voice was perfectly level. "He came back from that." The thing said nothing. "Frieza blew up my planet before I was born. My people came back. Some of them. Enough." The thing said nothing. "A god tried to erase the multiverse. We fixed it." He paused. "You believe that?" The thing said quietly. "You actually believe it?" "Yeah," he said. "Don't you?" A long pause. "I used to." So quiet it nearly disappeared into the mountain wind. "Before the process completed, when I was still..." It stopped itself. Goku's breath went slow and careful. "When you were still Gohan," he said. The bruised sky eyes changed for 1 second, one fraction of a moment that lasted no longer than a heartbeat. Something looked out of those eyes that Goku recognized. Not the thing that wore his son's face, nor the dark intelligence that had been studying him and fighting him and dissecting his power transitions. Something else, something that recognized him back. Then the power came up like a wave, and the moment was gone, and the thing screamed, not in pain, in a sound that was pain and rage and something else he couldn't name, a sound in Gohan's voice that Gohan had never made, that should not exist in any universe. The ki exploded off it in a sphere that hit Goku like a physical wall and sent him end over end through the sky until he caught himself 500 meters away. He hung in the air, breathing, processing. He had seen it. For 1 second, it was still there. Below, at the crater's edge, Piccolo's barrier cracked under the ki pulse, and he reinforced it with everything he had left. Beside him, Vegeta had his arms crossed and his teeth together, jaw working silently, watching the sky where Goku had become a speck at the limit of sight. "You saw something," Vegeta said. "I know," said Piccolo. "Do you know what it was?" "No." A pause. Vegeta uncrossed his arms, recrossed them. "That's either very good or very bad." With Goku, Piccolo said. "Those two things frequently overlap." Behind them, on the crater floor, Gohan had gotten one foot under himself. He was up on one knee now, head down, his teeth knitting back together in the slow, involuntary way, his hands shaking against the glass. He had seen the moment in those eyes. He had recognized what his father had recognized, because it was his own face, and you always knew your own face, even refracted through something dark and terrible, even diluted by years of absence and a process he did not want to understand. He had seen himself in there, and the seeing had done something to him that the entire preceding fight had not, something that cracked open a part of him that had been held very carefully closed since the thing had stepped out of the rift 4 hours ago, and he had looked at it and understood with the bone-deep certainty that requires no analysis what he was looking at. He pressed his hands flat against the glass and pushed, his legs responding, trembling, damaged, the left knee a wrong way that would need actual medical attention rather than key healing, but responding. He got to his feet. Piccolo turned and saw him. Something crossed the Namkian's face, relief and concern, and the particular expression Piccolo wore when Gohan did something simultaneously impressive and inadvisable, an expression Piccolo had been wearing in some form since Gohan was 4 years old.
"I can feel him," Gohan said. His voice was wrecked, hoarse and cracked, but the words were absolutely clear inside it. "He's still in there." He looked up at the sky, where his father was a distant point. "Dad found him." "Gohan, you are in no condition." "If Dad opens that window again," Gohan said, and looked at Piccolo with his one good eye, and what was in that eye made Piccolo go quiet. "I need to be ready to reach through it." A silence. Piccolo looked at him for a long moment, then he stepped beside him, put a hand on his shoulder, and began feeding what remained of his own ki into Gohan's body. Not much, he didn't have much left, but enough to stabilize the knee and shore up the worst of the structural damage. A last gift from a teacher to a student who had been many things over many years, and was, right now, in this moment, exactly what Piccolo had always known he could be. "Don't fall," Gohan said. "I know," Gohan said. High sky above the northern mountains. Goku came back in Super Saiyan Blue. He didn't announce it, didn't build to it theatrically. He was simply in base form and then in blue. The transition instantaneous, no dramatic power-up, no preliminary ki surge. He'd learned from the thing's earlier observations, and he moved through the transformation at a speed that collapsed the window to nothing, the ki spiking and stabilizing so quickly that by the time any external observer could register the transformation, it was already complete, and he was already moving. The blue ki around him was cold and controlled, nothing like the electric gold of Super Saiyan. Blue was precision, the marriage of God ki with Saiyan power, the controlled burn rather than the explosion. He'd spent years learning to wield it without waste. He hit the thing with a speed that even its refined pattern recognition couldn't fully account for, not because the speed was superhuman, though it was, but because the instantaneous transformation had given him a fraction of unexpected geometry, a half step of direction before the real direction resolved, a micro-feint built into his body movement, not into his power signature itself. The strike caught the thing across its left shoulder, the slower side, and the impact sent it corkscrewing sideways through the air. Before it had recovered its orientation, Goku was already repositioning, already coming from the new angle, already throwing the second. The block costed altitude. He pressed the advantage. He was not a pressure fighter by instinct. He was reactive, patient, a counterpuncher by nature, the kind who waited for the opponent to show him something and then responded. But he'd learned over a long career that there were specific moments when pressure was correct, when you'd seized a margin the opponent would recover from if you gave them time, and those moments demanded aggression, even from a man whose instincts ran the other direction. This was one of them. He drove it down through the ki blasts it threw at him. Two hastily formed.
He let them impact his raised forearms and pushed through, the blue form absorbing the energy rather than being displaced by it. He got his hands on it, which was the objective, close enough that ki blasts became impossible, and the fight returned to bodies and craft. At this power level, at close range, the fight was different. Both of them had more to work with and less room to work in. The scale amplified both offense and defense while reducing the space for the fine technical exchange of the base form period. It became more brutal, less elegant, the signs of it giving way incrementally to something older and raw. The thing bled from its lip. A strike had gotten through it couldn't fully account for. The blue form's key edge on Goku's knuckles opening the skin. Gohan's blood running down Gohan's chin. And Goku saw it and felt something he did not file away, that he let exist fully, that moved through him and came out the other side as resolve rather than paralysis. He drove a knee into its midsection and felt the impact transmit through the body properly this time. Felt the thing fold around it, the first real structural damage he'd managed, the first indication that its extraordinary defense had a threshold that could be raised. It came back immediately, no recovery time. It hit him 3 times in the ribs, the cracked ones, in rapid succession, each strike precisely targeted, and the pain was significant enough that he lost half a second of continuity, the kind of lapse that, at this level, was the difference between the next thing happening or not happening. The next thing was its hand closing on his collar, its ki spiking, the throw. He went down. The crater floor rushed up, and he hit it at a speed that turned the already fused glass to powder beneath him, the impact creating a new crater inside the original one, a shallow bowl of displaced earth with Goku at its center. Crater floor. He lay for 2 seconds, breathing, ribs worse, 3 cracked now, possibly 4, jaw still intact, but the left side of his face was swelling. His right shoulder had caught part of the landing wrong and was complaining loudly. His ki was still substantial, nowhere near depleted. The blue form was efficient, and he'd managed it carefully. 2 seconds. Then he got up. He always got up. This was not courage, not even determination, not in the way people usually meant when they said determination. It was something closer to simple fact. He got up because getting up was what came next. It had always been what came next, since King Piccolo, since Raditz, since every single thing that had come after. The getting up was just the thing that happened. He had never found a reason significant enough to make it not happen. He got up.
The thing was above him, 20 meters up, looking down. In its eyes, something was happening again. The deep ocean weather, the below-surface movement. He watched it while he settled his feet, pressed his ki against the worst of the rib damage, and breathed. "Why?" it said. He waited. "Why do you keep—" It stopped, started again. "In my timeline, when I emerged from the process and Goku was there, this Goku, another version, he got up 7 times. Something in the voice, something fracturing very slowly in the flat stone of it. 7, and the 7th time was different from the other 6. The 7th time he looked at me differently." A pause. "I didn't understand it then." Goku said nothing. He let the silence do its work. "He looked at me like he saw something worth getting up for," the thing said. "Not me, not the fight, something else, something inside." The voice stopped again. "Something inside you?" Goku said quietly. The bruised sky eyes looked at him. "He didn't make it," the thing said. "The 7th time." "I know," Goku said. And he was not performing gentleness, was not managing this conversation toward a tactical outcome. Though he was aware it had one, he was simply being what he actually was. A man who had outlived several versions of himself and who had an uncomplicated heart in the middle of a complicated life. "You came here," Goku said. A silence. "I told you why I came here. You told me one reason." Goku kept his eyes on that face, his son's face, ragged and bruised and containing multitudes
a logical reason, but a being that can jump timelines for one reason could have found easier targets, ones with less resistance, ones without. He gestured vaguely at the fighters assembled at the crater's edge. All of this. The thing's jaw moved, a muscle in its cheek. You came here specifically, Goku said, to a timeline where I'm still alive, where Gohan became what he was supposed to become, where all of us are. A pause. You could call that coincidence. I know you're smart enough to know it isn't. 30 meters of thin mountain air between them. What are you saying? The thing said.
I'm saying, Goku said, and the simplicity of what he was about to say was, in his mind, its own kind of power, that some part of you came here to be stopped, came here specifically to a timeline where stopping you was possible. He held its eyes. Some part of you that's been in there for 3 years, fighting your way through everything, looking out through borrowed eyes, waiting. Don't, the thing said, something cracking in the flat stone voice. Waiting for someone to see him, Goku finished. The way I saw him just now, the way my counterpart saw him 7 times. The sky around them was the wrong color, and the wind was cold, and the mountain walls shed slow avalanches in the silence that followed, the background soundtrack of a world that had been under pressure for 11 days and was showing its strain in small geological confessions. The thing's power was spiking now, not controlled, not directed, reactive, the key rising the way a fever rises, an involuntary response to internal crisis. It doesn't work that way, it said. The process, what was done to him, what was done to me, there is no recovery, no reversal. I know this because its voice broke on the last word, actually broke, the flat stone cracking through, and what was underneath was not stone at all. Because I remember being him. I remember everything. I remember Videl and Pan and Piccolo and every book I ever read, and every time you came home, and I remembered knowing it was ending, and I remembered not being able to stop it, and I have remembered it every single day for 3 years. The power spiked violently. A shockwave of raw ki rolled outward from it in a sphere, hitting Goku like a wall, blasting past him into the crater walls and the mountain beyond, triggering an avalanche that swallowed half the northern ridge. He planted his feet and held his ground against it, the blue ki forming a windbreak around him as the storm of displaced air washed through. There is no coming back from it, it finished, barely audible now, barely anything at all. I know because I'm still here, I'm still experiencing it, and there is no Gohan. Goku said one word, his son's name, said the way he'd said it when Gohan was 11 and terrified on a battlefield and needed a specific kind of reminder, not the reminder of power, the reminder of self. The thing went absolutely still. The ki storm settled around it, falling to nothing, leaving a silence that was more profound for what had preceded it. Goku was already moving, not to attack. He'd moved through the settling ki and across the distance between them, and he was at the thing's eye level, 3 meters away, and he was just standing there. No fighting stance, hands at his sides, the blue form's cold ki a steady presence around him, but none of it directed, none of it shaped for combat, just standing there, looking at his son's face.
I'm not going to pretend I understand it, he said. The process, what you went through. I'm not that smart, and I know it, but I know my son. And you're telling me he's been in there for 3 years, conscious, watching? That means he's been fighting for 3 years from the inside. He let that sit. That's Gohan. That's exactly what Gohan does. The bruised sky eyes were doing something beyond the available vocabulary of facial expression. He needs help, Goku said. Same as he always needs. Same as he's always too proud to ask for, until someone makes him. A pause. So I'm asking. Let me help. You can't.
tell you how. A silence of tectonic proportions. It would kill you, the thing said, barely above nothing, to pull him out. The energy required to reverse the process, to separate us. The backlash. Tell me how, Goku said again. The bruised sky eyes looked at him, and something behind them, something that had been waiting in a cold and lightless interior space for 3 years, watching and fighting, never quite giving up, because giving up was also not what Gohan did, ever, not in any timeline, not under any circumstances, made a decision. What it told him took 40 seconds, clinical, precise, the scientific mind that had always been Gohan's greatest weapon, applied to its own liberation with a thoroughness Goku could not fully follow but did not need to. He needed the one piece, the specific piece, which the thing gave him, its voice going flatter and more careful as it described it, the way you go careful around things that matter too much to be imprecise about. When it finished, Goku nodded once, then he looked up. "Gohan!" he called down to the crater floor. In the crater's edge, supported by Piccolo's hand on his shoulder, Gohan looked up, one good eye, battered beyond what most beings survived, still standing. Goku looked at his son and felt in the uncomplicated center of himself something settle. "You need to get up here, right now." Gohan flew. It cost him something to do it. The damage was significant, and the key to sustain flight at this state was not nothing, but he came up on a rising column of his own power, slow and unsteady compared to his usual movement, and arrived in the air between the crater floor and the wrong-colored sky, and looked at his father and at the thing that wore his face. Airborne, above the crater, there were 3 points of a triangle in the cold air.
"You heard?" Goku said, to no one in particular. "Some of it," Gohan said. His voice was barely functional. The thing that wore his face looked at him, whatever it had been before, whatever it had done, whatever the 3 years inside it had cost, and how much of the original had been consumed, and how much remained. In this moment, looking at the other half of itself, something in it was very still and very clear. "It's going to hurt," the thing said to Gohan, in Gohan's voice, but meaning it differently now, not as a fact about the external world, but as an acknowledgement between the two halves of a thing that should never have been divided. Gohan looked at his own face. "Yeah," he said, a pause. "I know. You fought for 3 years." Gohan said. "So did you," the thing said, from the outside. "Dad told you we'd figure it out." Something moved in the bruised sky eyes. "He tells everyone that. He's usually right," Gohan said. The thing looked at Goku, then back to Gohan, then at the assembled fighters below. Piccolo watching from the crater rim with an expression that had gone past composure into something that was its own kind of prayer. Pan, who had stopped fighting Trunks and was standing very still with her hands pressed over her mouth. "Pan," the thing said quietly, looking at her. "Gohan's daughter. She's new," Gohan said. "She doesn't remember me, the other one." "No," it said. "Good." And then it closed its eyes. What Goku did next was not something that existed in any key technique manual, or any martial arts tradition, or any of Whis' formal instructions. It was improvised in the way the best things Goku did were always improvised, drawn from the accumulated understanding of a lifetime, and assembled in the moment of need without a blueprint. He went into ultra instinct, not the silver of the full form, but something underneath it, the precursor state, existing in the space between normal consciousness and the full dissolution of self that ultra instinct required, the state where instinct and intention coexisted rather than one replacing the other. He accessed it now. In this state, his ki became something different, not more powerful in the raw sense, different in quality, finer, more penetrating, able to interface with ki signatures at a resolution his normal sensing capacity couldn't reach, like switching to seeing the surface of water, to seeing what moved below it. He extended his ki toward the thing that wore Gohan's face, and he felt them both signatures layered over each other, intertwined aligned in some places, fused in ways that confirmed what he'd been told. The process had been thorough. The 3 years had done their work. But underneath the fusion, in the deepest register of the reading, Gohan was there, separate, intact, tired beyond what Goku had imagined, a soul-deep exhaustion that made the physical damage on his son's body look minor by comparison, but intact. The specific signature that was Gohan's alone, recognizable since the boy had been 4 years old, the day he'd first burst out a flare of ki in fear and surprise and sent the sensors off the scale. He found that signature. He took hold of it. What happened next took 12 seconds from the outside and approximately 12 lifetimes from the inside. Goku pulled the ki apart. Not clean. Nothing about this was clean. The fusion resisted because 3 years of integration had created an adhesion that didn't yield to the theoretical possibility of separation any more than a healed bone yields to the theoretical possibility of being unbroken. He pulled against it with everything the Ultra Instinct precursor state could generate, which was enormous, enough to bend the air around the 3 of them into visible distortion, enough to turn the sky above them briefly white with ki discharge in a pillar that Krillin later reported seeing from 200 kilometers away. The thing screamed. Gohan screamed. Goku did not scream because he was using everything he had for the pulling and there was nothing left for sound. But something in his face was doing what a scream would do if he'd had the capacity left for it. His ribs finished breaking, all of them, not just the cracked 4, the pressure of the ki manipulation transmitting back through his own body and finding every structural weakness. His vision went white. He pulled. 12 seconds. In the 12th second, something gave. The fusion broke. The thing came apart the way a storm comes apart, not collapsing, but dispersing, the component energies seeking their natural states. The dark ki that had been the invader lost its coherence when the structure it had built itself through was suddenly absent, and became, in the absence of that structure, simply energy, raw and formless, and ultimately without a host, without purpose, without the will that had sustained it through a timeline's worth of terrible intentions. Nothing. It dissolved in the air above the northern mountains, and the air absorbed it the way it absorbed everything that was no longer anything. What remained was Gohan, falling. Goku caught him before he'd dropped 20 meters, an impressive piece of reflexive flight management for a man with no functional ribs, and came down together in a controlled descent that was not so much flying as organized falling, landing on the crater floor with enough grace that the landing didn't kill either of them, which Goku considered a success under the circumstances. Crater floor, aftermath. He went to his knees, not voluntarily. The ribs made the decision and the rest of him followed. He kept his arms around Gohan, who was unconscious, who was breathing in the slow, deep way of someone whose body had taken a complete inventory and decided that consciousness was a luxury it could not currently afford. Piccolo was there. Goku hadn't seen him come down into the crater. One moment the Namekian was at the rim, and then he was simply there, kneeling on Gohan's other side, 2 fingers pressed against Gohan's neck, reading the pulse with an expression that didn't change, whose stillness communicated everything. "He's alive," Piccolo said. "Yeah," Goku said. Goku, Piccolo's voice doing the thing it did when he was trying to be careful and was not naturally a careful speaker. That technique, where did that come from? "Made it up," Goku said. Piccolo looked at him. "Kind of," Goku added. Above them, Pan landed. She hit the crater floor at a run and covered the distance between the rim and her father in about 3 seconds, which, given her injuries from the earlier containment effort, was impressive enough that Goku filed away the thought that she had definitely inherited something from both sides of her family. She dropped next to Gohan, put both hands on his face, and looked at him for a long moment, at the familiar face, her father's face, and nothing else. No echo of anything that should not be. Just him. "Dad," she said. Gohan's eyelids moved, fractionally. The deep, unconscious breathing shifted marginally towards something less far away. Pan pressed her forehead against his. Goku watched this and felt something in his chest that had nothing to do with the broken ribs, a warmth in the specific register that was only produced by one specific kind of moment, the moment after the moment, where the people you loved were still there to be in the moment after. He became aware that Vegeta was standing 2 meters away, his expression doing several complicated things at once, the kind of thing that happens sometimes when there were witnesses and he couldn't be entirely unguarded, but was unable to be entirely guarded either. The mental one, Vegeta said. Yep, Goku agreed. A pause. Your ribs. I know, all of them. Another pause. That technique, pulling the fusion apart. You had no idea if that was going to work. I had some idea, Goku said, which was technically true, in the sense that he had believed it would work, and belief had always been a form of knowledge for him, imprecise but not negligible. Vegeta appeared to understand this because he made a sound that was not quite a word and looked away toward the mountains. Idiot, he said, with a degree of warmth that was technically inaudible but nonetheless present. Probably, Goku agreed. The sky normalized over the following hour, not all at once, not dramatically, not with any kind of announcement. The wrong-colored clouds just began, gradually, to resume the colors they were supposed to be. The lightning that had been striking upward from the earth reversed and became the regular downward variety. The atmospheric disturbance that had been building over the northern mountains for 11 days began to dissipate, the air claiming its ordinary relationship with gravity. Gohan regained consciousness 40 minutes after the fusion broke. He opened his eyes and looked at the now ordinary sky above the crater, and then at Pan beside him, and then at Piccolo, and then, rotating his head carefully to the right, at his father lying next to him, a man who was perfectly fine, except for all of his ribs. They looked at each other. "Hey," Goku said. "Hey," Gohan said. His voice was destroyed. "You look terrible. You look worse," Goku said. Gohan tried to laugh and found it hurt too much.